Hello and welcome back to the second installment of our education series through South Dakota Youth Soccer. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. The second topic that we're going to discuss is going to be the 5 elements of a training activity. So this ties into our last presentation, which was on what is play, practice, play. We're going to talk about the 5 elements and how that is intertwined within play, practice, play, and really in any model of coaching training sessions that you utilize, and how it can be a benefit for you as coaches to create the most optimal learning environment for your players. So again, just like play, practice, play, that topic, and then today's topic, these philosophies and methodologies are based on U.S. Soccer's grassroots coach education, and that's where we are utilizing this platform in terms of the content and information. So we will move forward with the 5 elements of a training activity. We're just going to discuss what those 5 elements are and an overview of them. And then again, we'll talk about how best they can serve you as a coach within your training environment to ensure that it's player-centered, there's learning happening within your session, and that the activities are set up in a way and the environment set up in a way that it's developmentally appropriate for them. Okay, so the 5 elements of a training activity. It's a tool for the coach to use to observe and check the created situation on the field, adapt if necessary, based on the player's behavior within the training session goal. The first element is organized, which is a key element to start with, to work in sequential order towards coaching. So we work from left to right on the screen, organized being the first element, game-like, repetition, challenging, and then coaching is that 5th element. And the best way to maybe think about this is that these being treated in sequential order is done in a sense so that coaching doesn't happen immediately we start our activity. There's a checklist, so to speak, that we should go through to ensure that the environment's the most suitable for learning for the players, and then we can get into coaching. So you can kind of think about it like 4 elements: organized, game-like, repetition, and challenge. We get a green light on all those based on our observation and things we consider. Then we are green lighted to begin coaching on the field. So organized, we'll start there. So I've just provided a few examples of what the components might be to allow for a training session to be organized. So we'll just pull a few out here. So developmentally appropriate session goal. So what we mean by that might be the goal that you are utilizing for your players to achieve in the training session. We use the example that we did yesterday, or the presentation before, sorry. It was based on attack, and the objective was for players to move the ball forward, pass and dribble to create chances. So that was set up in a way, the activities anyway, for U6 to U8 players. So if we were to utilize that same training objective for older players, that's fine, but the setup might need to be a little bit different based on the space we utilize, the type of questions we might ask, the physical demand placed on the players because of the quality of the player and the fact that they're older. So we need to consider what's developmentally appropriate. Like I said, field setup needs to be safe, right? Needs to be organized and structured in a way that is understood by your players, what the intention is of the activity. Could they repeat it back to you, what the goal or activity outcome should be? So it should be organized in a way that's very clear and understood. Of course, there needs to be a safe learning environment as well. So organization in terms of balls, pennies, bibs, considering other factors around you. Maybe you have a practice where there's other sports going on in fields next to you. Are you ensuring that it's the safest possible environment for your kids? Another piece to consider when you're in this first element of is your activity organized is the transition between activities. So in the play, practice, play model, when we transition between the first play phase to the practice phase to the final play phase, have you done the work organizationally to ensure that the transition in between will go smoothly so that your players have an optimal amount of time to experience playing? And then I mentioned physical demand as well as something to consider. The outcome then, if you are observing your training session in the first few minutes of the first activity of play one, to give a green light, you would say, okay, the training environment looks safe, it's fun, and there's a clear understanding then from the players as to what is expected in the activity. The second element, game-like. So once we get through organized, we move down to game-like, and we consider some of these components to ensure that it is game-like. There's, of course, a ball being used. There's two teams, so one team has a certain objective and the other team has another objective. There's 4 moments occurring within the activity for both teams. So when we talk about the moments in the game, those 4 moments would be attacking, defending, and then the 2 transition moments in between, which is transition from attack to defense and transition from defense to attack. So we need to ensure the activities we utilize have those so it replicates the game as much as possible. And in turn then, directional scoring opportunities. So just like the players experience in a game on a weekend, they're going to go a certain way, whether attacking or defending. So we want to ensure the activities we have that component as well. And then of course there needs to be certain laws of the game that we're utilizing that replicate the game model for sure and what's developmentally appropriate within that game model. And then of course the laws of the game per that game model. If we say, okay, it's a green light, this activity's game-like and we're good to go, you can see out on the field that the outcome then is that players are again enjoying the experience and it does look like the game itself. The next element, repetition. So we've gone through organized, game-like, now we're on the third element, which is repetition. The first thing that maybe comes to mind is repeated maybe touches on the ball or passes back and forth with a partner. That might be the first thing you think about when you think about a way in which you've run an activity in a training session. We don't mean that in this aspect. We mean repetition in the context of, do players get the opportunity to have repeated behavior based on the training objective? So if we think back to the practice play session that we utilized in the last presentation, so it was attack was the moment, and we wanted to see the players' behaviors be such that could they pass or dribble forward to create chances. We want to see repeated behaviors of that happening. So if the activity is set up in a way where players don't get to repeat that behavior, then we have to look at it and think, okay, what do we need to manipulate within the training activity to ensure that there is repetition? And that might be adjusting some players around to different teams they might be on or groups they're with. We might need to think about the space we're using. Is it too long? Is it too short? So when we go over that repetition piece, it can take a little bit of time to observe and recognize whether or not that's happening, but it's okay to take time within these 5 elements. If it takes 1 minute, we might have not spent enough time to really know if the environment's the most optimal for learning. So it might take up to 5 minutes to go through these elements to ensure that we are hitting all of them to create the best environment for them. And then the outcome, if we have hit it, is that we see meaningful repetitions of the players experiencing it. So to refer back to that last training session, the play 1 about attack, if players do have a lot of opportunities to move the ball forward, pass and dribble, and are creating chances, we know that they're getting that behavior repeated, so we can give ourselves a green light. And then the final of the 4 elements before we get into the coaching element, which is the 5th, is challenge. So we've got organized, game-like, repetition, and now we're on to challenge. And this is a key piece. In order for players to improve and get better, they have to have success, but then also have moments where they aren't successful. So there has to be a challenge there in order for them to learn and develop. So an example of some components that will allow for different challenge levels is to recognize when necessarily we need to move between more or less challenging activities. So in our example in the session we went over the other day, if we recognize in that first core activity where the players needed to dribble across a grid and there were two defenders trying to prevent them from doing it. If they're unable to get across, the players that have the ball, we need to think about, oh, this is too challenging for them. We need to manipulate some things, shrinking the space, making it bigger, pulling a player off, adding a player on. Those might be some considerations for you as a coach to ensure that the challenge level is right. And again, to base the challenge off of something, we need to think about success. Are they having success? Are they having too much success? And then can we manipulate it to ensure that there's a balance of it? And then once we've got through the first four elements, so we've observed this training activity, the first play phase, we've gone through the first four elements, we feel good about it. Now we can get into coaching. And this is the exciting part for us, right? We initially just want to jump out there and start to coach, where in fact we again need to be patient and observe, make sure the environment's as appropriate as possible for the players to learn. And then we can utilize our coach's toolkit. And in that coach's toolkit, we can check and adapt. So we can maybe ask a question of a player. Do they understand the purpose of the activity? If they don't, do we need to adapt and change something within it? Can we give positive reinforcement? Do we see a behavior that a player is exhibiting that's one related to the training goal, and we can give positive reinforcement of coaching over the flow to that player, or pulling the player aside to recognize that moment. We can ask questions. We can utilize keywords throughout the training activity to orient the player's focus. We can get on the field and demonstrate. So maybe you saw a moment in the activity that you would like to reinforce. Here's what we're trying to show within the activity based on the training goal, and the players can replicate it for you. Or perhaps you see a moment in the activity that breaks down, and there was a moment for a player to display a behavior to dribble into an opening, and they didn't. Well, maybe we get on the field and show a demonstration of how that looks, or even better, ask the players to show us how they might go about finding success by dribbling into the opening. And then, of course, we can give feedback. And then another style is a command style of telling players what you expect of them and want them to show you. Another piece to consider is the amount of time you do spend in coaching and what those interactions are like and how long. At the end of the day, we want the players to play the game as much as possible in training. So our interactions with them need to be very meaningful, of course, but also limited in time. So as much planning as you can do to have questions ready, to have a plan with how much time you want to spend talking to your players will allow for that interaction the moments you do stop to be not only meaningful, like I said, but to get them back on the field playing. And with that, those are the 5 elements of a training activity. So hopefully your takeaway is now understanding that within the design of the activities you run in a training session, there should be a step-by-step process for you as a coach that you do follow to ensure the environment's as suited as possible for players to learn. And these 5 elements should serve your ability to do that. So try it out, go through them in a training session that you run. I think it's a really useful tool and something that I believe in wholeheartedly as a part of U.S. Soccer's coach education model. So look forward to hearing any stories about how it goes. And thanks again for taking the time today. And we will see you in our next edition. Thanks, and stay safe.